Hello and welcome to Game Saves from the Strong. This is our first real episode that we're doing, so I'm excited that everyone is out here to watch. My name is Andrew Borman and I am the digital games curator here at the Strong, and we are streaming from the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, the iCheg Lab. Behind me you can see thousands upon thousands of games. They're 3 deep at the very least. Everything from PlayStation 2 to educational games in all those boxes behind me, and those post-it notes say that there were CDRs in those boxes. We have Famicom games, we have Genesis games, a little bit of everything that a researcher would really like to play. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Game Boy Color version of San Francisco Rush, which was canceled. Now, for those of you thinking that, oh, I played San Francisco Rush on the Game Boy Color at one point, let me switch scenes here, and we will be able to see that this is the version that you probably played. San Francisco Rush 2049 and Hello, My Brother is a kind of futuristic sequel to San Francisco Rush. Now, this is the Game Boy Color version, and it is kind of reminiscent of games like Super Sprint or even Rock and Roll Racing. It's an isometric kind of side racing game. And while it's not the most exciting looking game, it's actually quite a bit of fun. I was playing it a little bit earlier today. So this was the version that you probably played. The version that we're going to play today is quite a bit different from this version. And before the question comes up, I am playing in an emulator today just for the best video quality possible. Plus the games we have, well, I'll get into how we found the builds that we're going to play in just a little bit. Now, before we get started, you may or may not remember the arcade version of San Francisco Rush, so I do have a little bit of a fun video that I found in our video archives that I think you'll enjoy. Give me 1 second to switch this over and we will be on our way.
The streets of San Francisco are extremely dangerous. Watch out, because San Francisco Rush redefines racing simulation altogether. Atari Games put you behind the wheel to take you on a breathtaking, teeth-clenching ride that will shake you up. The streets of San Francisco provide the beautiful and challenging backdrop for the most exciting driving game of the 90s, San Francisco Rush, a race on the exciting hills and landmarks of the most popular city in the world. San Francisco Rush is designed to earn today and for years to come. Every aspect of this driving game has been crafted for earning big bucks. In San Francisco Rush, you are not constrained by boring racetrack loops. Instead, you can take shortcuts to incrementally improve your time against the competition. Thread the needle just right, or pay the explosive consequences. Players will put thousands of dollars in the cash box as they seek out the multitude of shortcuts hidden throughout the city. Players won't race down Lombard, the crookedest street in the world. They'll jump over it. To help players negotiate the fastest and most challenging driving game, they will pick from up to 8 cars with unique speed and handling characteristics. Just when they thought they'd mastered the tracks, they can step up to the full racing simulation. It's extreme. Over the top. That's your cash box with San Francisco Rush. It's where rubber hits the road. It's extreme.
And that is a bit of a marketing advertisement by either Atari Games or Midway, who published the game. If I'm not mistaken, there is some prototype footage in that marketing video, so I thought it'd be interesting to share, especially as that really speaks to the fact that we would like to digitize some more of our tapes in our collection so that we can see materials that really probably are lost to time. Along with that, we do have a lot of archival material related to San Francisco Rush. Now, I went ahead and digitized some of these myself just so they're a little bit easier to view than the secondary camera facing down at some sheets of paper. So things like this are in the collection, which are really quite bland when you think about it. It's explaining how they would have shipped those gigantic San Francisco Rush cabinets, figuring out how many would fit in a container, how many they could get into it so that they could maximize their value. This is the sort of thing where it's really not likely to survive all this time. So the fact that we have these sorts of things in our collection is really quite amazing. Now, unfortunately, not everything comes into our collection looking the same way. This is a stack of San Francisco Rush materials that I was digging through. This sort of material is often found in warehouses, maybe people's basements, so you're never really quite sure how it's going to turn up, and you know that they're not going to necessarily be saved in the same kind of way that maybe a museum would from the start. So this was something that effort was made to make sure that as much of this could be preserved as possible. All of these pages turn individually. There's no smell to them. They made sure that there was no mold. So our conservation team here at The Strong really did a great job in making these materials in some sort of accessible form. Otherwise, they would have been lost. We also have things related to the ports of San Francisco Rush. This was actually stuck in the folder because the team that was working on the port for the Dreamcast wanted to know what other racing games or driving games were coming out on the Dreamcast so that they could know where and when to position San Francisco Rush to come out for the platform. I love seeing old printouts of websites because it shows that really the gaming press does have a lot of value when it comes to giving some market research for the teams. Now, I'm going to hold off on some more of the archival material and just point out that the game we're going to be playing today, the San Francisco Rush Game Boy Color port, really not a whole lot was known about it. Unseen64, a website that focuses on unreleased and prototype games, was able to dig out this image of San Francisco Rush from a magazine called Consolemania, and it was from issue 78. This was essentially the only Game Boy Color port San Francisco Rush Game Boy Color port picture that I could find. That's really not a whole lot to go off of. So without further ado, let's get ready to check out some San Francisco Rush. And I'm going to check out the earliest build that we have of it, which doesn't have sound, but that's okay too. So give me 1 second to switch over. My OBS, which we use to stream, has a little bit of a mind of its own. This port was being made by Digital Eclipse, and it seems like they may not even have this version of the game anymore. The menu is a little slow to load. Now, the menu is in black and white. We do get a bit of a setup function, except it's not available yet. That's how early this build is. This build is from October 5th, 1998, and the game would go on to see at least a few more months of development. We're just going to go right into a race. We do have essentially 3 tracks, but as we'll see, not all of them are really available. Even the backwards mirrored modes, they don't work all that well. So we're going to start right at track 1. And see what happens. We get a selection of cars in beginner, intermediate, expert, extreme mode. And we can change their colors because it is a Game Boy Color game. So, of course, we want to show off colors. I am not quite that good at this game, so I'm just going to go to intermediate. And we'll go blue. And we're off to the races. There is no countdown, so we're right into the race. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see that there is some debugging information. And remember that this is an early port. You're also viewing it probably at 720 or 1080p as opposed to a tiny, tiny Game Boy Color screen. One of the problems with this early version of the game, A, is that it's very, very hard to control. And B, those guys in front of me, those cars in front of me, really get off to a lead that can be very hard to come back from. There is no collision with the cars. You can see they're pulling away again. So if we do happen to catch them, we can drive right through them. Oh, and it's hard to drive. I'm going to try to hit some of those jumps that come up, but you don't get a whole lot of warning, and I just don't have that much control in this build. Oh, that's a jump. So when you factor in that this is running on a Game Boy Color, it really is quite the impressive looking game. There should be a jump coming up soon when it splits off. I think we're technically on lap 2 now. Oh, this is tough. Are we about to go to lap 2? It is very hard to tell on this version of the game. But that's what makes prototypes so fun. We can step through the development of a game knowing that it doesn't simply appear on store shelves as a final product, but it goes through this iteration process until hopefully something good comes out of it. I think that was technically a jump over to the left. So some of these things on the side of the road are buildings. Some of them look, I think it's very easy to get stuck. I think that's going to be the end of this particular run. Let me reset it. I want to just show some more that is going on. So what makes this interesting is this wasn't recovered off a floppy disk. This wasn't recovered off even a Game Boy Color cartridge, but this was recovered from hard drive files from Atari themselves. And it was in one particular employee's folder, and it was actually marked, I think, junk or trash, something along those lines. But in my experience, those folders usually have the things that, yeah, they're meant to be temporary, but a lot of the times they're really valuable. And in that folder, I found multiple versions of this game. A lot of them were being sent through their email to different employees to test or do whatever they do with their games. So the fact that this exists and it was meant to be deleted is really, really cool. So we'll just go to track 2 right now. And again, they're off to the races very, very quickly. And this track should look very, very similar to the other one because, well, it's that early. There's our little jump. And at least we're keeping up with them a little bit better this time. And the game does actually look better as we go on through the development process. Here's that jump I was talking about. So it's quite the jump. But you can see there's only one track, so perhaps it's not as interesting. So let's fast forward in time just a little bit. Well, a few months, actually. We're going to jump all the way to the February 26th, 1999 build. It looks a little something like this. We're starting to get sound. Sound is always appreciated. Now, there are a few more builds in between the one that we just looked at and this one, but this was a real significant jump in quality. We can see we have a brand new menu that's full color, and we do have a setup function. We can set the number of laps, drones, which is the number of cars. We'll keep them on medium. I don't know how well balanced the other ones are, but I think this is the most interesting thing is they realized that the frame rate and the graphics weren't going to necessarily be arcade quality, let's say. But they gave the player the option of either having a higher frame rate and also having a bit less resolution detail. Sorry, the door's making some noises back there. Or having the higher resolution and lower frame rate. So we're going to keep it at the higher resolution mode to start, then we'll go back and compare things a little bit. Now the first track, well, the track system looks a little bit different right now, but it will change again in just a little bit, too. We're going to go to track 2 because it does look quite a bit different in this build. The system is pretty much the same for cars, a little bit fancier menu, but we can skip through it. We'll go to our, what looks to be a Beetle. There's expert mode, so I don't know how well it's going to go. But now we get this nice sunset for track 2. And we do get some sound, some music. Music is different depending on what track you go to. The buildings, I think, start to look a little bit more like buildings. Oh, but this car is hard to drive. One of the problems with the game is the cars do have a bit of a hard time looking like they're staying on the track. Whoa. The game has made a significant visual jump, I think, compared to that earlier build. Now, there should be a jump coming up over this way, or some sort of shortcut. Oh no. I made a mistake. We can reverse, though. You can also notice, sorry for the sounds, that we have a bit more of a recognizable thing here. We have our laps, we have our time, we don't have the debug information that we had before. I'm going to unstick myself by resetting the system there. That's the challenge of the prototype games, is you never know what's going to happen. In that case, I got stuck. It will likely happen a few more times throughout this. We'll give that one another shot, though, with a car that maybe... Beginner. Beginner sounds probably more up my speed. I'll go with the green one, because the green is the best. Now, to really get the full effect, if you want to shrink down your window a little bit... Let me pause it for just a second. Give you the full screen without me. If you shrink it down to a tiny, tiny window, you get the full Game Boy Color effect. Of course, you probably have a backlit screen, so you'll probably see it a lot better than you would have seen it on a... Oh, not much better. On a Game Boy Color. It's certainly a more ambitious title than the other Game Boy Color game, which honestly probably plays a little bit better. But this was doing things that I don't think really many Game Boy Color games were even trying to do at the time. Even the impressive canceled games like Resident Evil on the Game Boy Color, it's really a different type of graphical style. Again, perhaps more visually appealing, but different, to say the least. I find it impressive that you do get that sense of elevation change. They managed to make the cars feel like you're going up and down hills, which is San Francisco from what I'm told. I haven't been there yet, but next week. The cars are a lot more competitive in this version compared to the other one, even though I'm doing quite poorly. It feels fair anyway. The other one just wasn't fair. Now, I can crash into them, which seems to affect me more than it affects them. The tracks are fairly long, too. We're still on lap 1 and... Well, lap 2 now, but we're 2 minutes in. A 2-minute long track is, I think, fairly good. Now, the question is, do we try to risk it and go that weird shortcut way that maybe wasn't complete? Getting some air now, anyway. Oh, boy. I think I'd be terrified racing down the streets of San Francisco in this bus doing jumps over hills. We're going to go for it. It's going to go very poorly. Nope, that's the same thing as last time. Let's see if we go left. Not much of a shortcut if I have to slow down this much, but... So, almost. No. Yeah, I don't think it really helped us any. We're back in 8th place now. But that's part of the whole prototyping phase. So, the graphics are fairly blocky right now, but let's reset the game and go into our low resolution mode. You guys don't see me rocking my head back and forth to these cool tunes. Let's go back to track 1. Ooh, no, I didn't switch the settings. That would defeat the purpose. We'll go with this guy. Orange sounds nice. So you can tell the graphics are noticeably blockier than they were, but the frame rate and the controls respond a little bit better than they did before. So I think it's neat that they were going to give players that option. High resolution mode being relative, of course. But I do feel like I have a lot better control as I crash into a wall. Now, unfortunately, in our archives, we don't have a lot of we don't have any printed documentation related to this game. But in a little bit, as we get towards what I'll call the final build, I don't know if it's actually a final build, but a later build, the last that we have, we do have some bug and suggestions from testers that were working on the game. So we'll get to see a little bit about what they were thinking about the game at the time. I feel like every time I play this game, I'm a little bit worse at it. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I think it's quite fun, honestly. Give it a few more months of polish, and I think it would have been okay. But you can see how the walls are a bit lower resolution than they were. So one more thing that I can show on this build, before we get into the final one, which we'll spend the most time on after I reset it again. So I want to show the third track, or the so-called third track of the game. And as you might imagine, content wasn't finished either. We'll go beginner. So everything starts out looking pretty much like the other tracks. Everything goes okay for a little while. We get some nice jumps. Oh, crash into a wall like usual. Those cars seem to have kind of disappeared though. Some of them did. Then it's end. Basically, there was no more of the track finished at the time this build was made, so I'm trying to follow those cars a little bit, but the end is the end of the road, literally. We're running out of time because there is a lack of checkpoints to give us more time. So that's the end of the road, literally, in this case. We get a nice view of the car. So we can check out to see what happens when we play backwards. So depending on the build, different bugs seem to occur when you're playing backwards or mirrored. See, we're kind of seeing right through the grass. That happens when you're going the other way too, but track 1 is certainly the most polished of all the levels in this. Now, what I love about just the fact that we have these Game Boy Color builds at all is Game Boy Color flash carts, official flash carts, development carts, they were not the cheapest thing ever. And the fact is that a lot of them were reused over and over again. Yes, this has a hard time getting to checkpoints. So the fact that they were reused over and over again means that there aren't that many of these builds that exist, even on cart, or were ever really put to a cart. And those that were constantly rewritten. So things like earlier builds are often lost in the shuffle a little bit, just because it's a cost-saving measure. So the fact that these were just sitting on some guy's hard drive when Atari bit the dust is really a bit of a miracle. But that's the case with a lot of these prototype games, I guess. The floppy disks were a lot cheaper. The CDRs, definitely. DVD-R is a lot cheaper compared to a flash cart from Nintendo. I'm sure somebody out there has the actual price sheet for how much they would have cost. So let's get into some more archival materials, since I think this is a good time to do it. And we're going to go back to the San Francisco Rush arcade game, and probably one of the earliest designs for the cabinet itself. So you can see it just says Rush on the actual marquee, but it is marked as San Francisco Rush. This is from 8/5/1994. Now, the game wouldn't be released until December of 1996, so this is a huge period of time between design of the cabinet and actual release. You get a little bit of the side view. I can't actually point to anything. My mouse cursor doesn't show up. But you get an idea for what they were going for with the cabinet. Even things like the seat design, which it turns out we have dozens and dozens of pages about making changes to the seat, how much that would cost, all the little things that go into making an arcade cabinet that you just don't think about. Even what monitor goes into the cabinet. Now, if I have it right, that's our Unseen 64 image. But, where did it go? We have an image somewhere. I must not have put it up. But they were considering putting in those big 50-inch rear projection screens like Sega was using at the time. But it turns out, I believe Mitsubishi was the one making those rear projection screens. They had an exclusive contract with Sega. So the reason why we didn't see more rear projection screen systems was they just weren't available, despite other companies like Atari really, really wanting to have at least a few showcase units using those huge 50-inch rear projection screens. But as we move forward a little bit more, we get to things like this. This is another printed one, and it is, again, a San Francisco Rush cabinet, both from the side view and from the front. But we have some handwriting in pencil at the top of it, talking about this being a preliminary layout of the new Rush cabinet. So that tells you they're going through this iteration process, even though a company like Atari had been making games for a very, very long time. So we have handwritten notes on these design documents that are really, really cool. And not only do we have handwritten notes on printed designs like this, we do have pencil documents as well. This is talking about the vacuum forming. Talking about what parts would be shiny, what parts would be, or how many they could make per day, which is 100 per week. Talking about the spectrum of colors, getting a quote to figure out how these things are actually going to come together, what it's going to cost for not only Atari to purchase these things, but to sell to different arcades throughout the country. So this is the really, really cool stuff that's in the arcade. Or in our archive, arcade, they kind of go hand to hand. This also talks a lot about the cabinet itself. Oh, this is talking about some of those monitors I was talking about. I thought I had it. So the layout was progressing towards a human factors mock-up. Again, just making sure they had this cool design, but how is it going to feel when somebody actually sits down in the cabinet? Is it going to feel right? Is the shifter going to be in the right spot? Are the pedals going to be available? Is a kid that is 4 foot tall going to have a similar experience to the adult that's nearly 6 feet tall? All of those things need to be taken into consideration. And there's also discussion of, do they want to put out a single player cabinet that then you just link together as many of them as you want? Or do you want to create this 2-player deluxe cabinet? They weren't even sure what size display they wanted in it. They did know that they needed a medium resolution monitor, which the final San Francisco Rush cabinet did have. I briefly owned a San Francisco Rush The Rock, which we'll take a look at in just a little bit. And that was a single cabinet. So they clearly went with that sort of design. This talks again about that 50-inch projection unit. Mitsubishi having custom builds for Sega exclusively. So we just simply didn't get anything else. Now, they did work on contacting other rear projection companies, but Mitsubishi was really the main one making things. Now, Metal Maniacs was another arcade cabinet that they had made. So they were thinking about what they could salvage from those cabinets to reduce costs, to use simpler seats, whatever they could do to get the price down so that they could get more of these things out there into the world. Now, I did talk a little bit about San Francisco Rush The Rock. That was kind of the pseudo-sequel that came out, kind of more of an expansion. You could get an upgrade kit for the original San Francisco Rush cabinet. We have a lot of documents related to that, including this, which is an assembly for the cabinet. This goes through, and it does unfold, but we were being careful because they were water damaged at one point. I didn't want to unfold them. It goes through all the different pieces that need to go on it, from the labels to the brackets that they were using, the things on the floorboard. It shows you where all those little pieces are going to fit together to actually assemble the cabinet. Now, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, it's actually called San Francisco Rush 1.5. That seems to be its internal name for quite a while, instead of Rush the Rock that it became. So that gives you a little bit more of that prototype stuff that was going on. Now, you can also see the date was 9/6/98. So we're talking actually, no, there are things from 97, rather. It's a little hard for me to see from here. So you're talking about the year following the release that they were working on this, just seeing what parts maybe needed to be changed, how they'd be shipping out to people. And we also have things like this, which is on a transparent sort of paper. And again, it's a side view showing how the monitor fits into the cabinet. It's really, really cool stuff. And there's all sorts of other weird prototype cabinets that we're not even sure what they go to. I tweeted out one of them, which is @Borman18, and it's this really quite large cabinet. And we have no idea what it goes to because it's not actually marked on the paper, and it's not anything that ever saw production. So there's just all this stuff in our archives that really, really paints the picture of what goes into making an arcade game. We're going to take a break from some of the documents, and I'm going to sneak in something that is not related to San Francisco Rush at all. It's not related to Rush 1.5, not related to 2049 or whatever it was, the sequel, the futuristic sequel. It's hard to remember those numbers. But it's going to be another Game Boy Color game, and I'm going to go right to the full game here. So this is still San Francisco Rush. But I have this other ROM that was found in very, very similar files as the other ones, or folders. Oh, I have to refresh. Now, it's a very, very early tech demo, and it's not labeled what it is. But based on images that are still on IGN, I believe this is an early, very, very early engine test for Gauntlet Dark Legacy on the Game Boy Color. There was a Game Boy Advance version of Dark Legacy, which is probably why this version ended up being canceled. But this early tech demo looks a lot like the images of Gauntlet Dark Legacy for the Game Boy Color still on IGN. And of course, you can find those images on Unseen 64 should the IGN ones disappear at some point. So this is a little bit of a bonus showing you what Gauntlet could have looked like on the Game Boy Color. Now, the game did get a little bit further along in development than this. There are some screens where you have a HUD and you have a playable character on the screen. But with only 3 images being out there, it's not really clear how far it got in development. I haven't seen anything else related to Gauntlet in the files that we have. But in the future, it may be worth coming back to this because who knows, we might have something else in our files. Now, we're going to switch to the final 2 builds of San Francisco Rush for the Game Boy Color, and we'll spend more time on those along with some very other cool documents related to San Francisco Rush. And we're going to start with this one, which of course it disappears when I do that. This one you'll notice is in black and white, but it is still a Game Boy Color game. This is actually, they've labeled it as fake BW, so fake black and white. So it's running on full Game Boy Color hardware, but it's what it might look like if they made a black and white version of the game. Now we do have the full setup menu. It's a little bit differently organized again. We can select our laps, all of this stuff. The options are fairly similar to the previous build, but this build is again from March 24th, 1999. And it is the latest build series that we have. We can look at records. All these seem to be initials of employees at Digital Eclipse. If any Digital Eclipse employees are out there, I'd be curious how you feel about where you've been ranked in the fastest and best laps. But we'll go into a race just so you can get a feel for what it might look like. Now, we have 3 tracks in this one, but we've lost our reverse mode, our mirror mode, or backwards mode and mirror mode. Those things are simply gone. So we'll go to the first track because we've seen this one the most. You can't switch the color of the car, obviously. I was curious if it would change shades when I hit up and down, but it doesn't. But we'll get into it. The game is starting to look a lot more polished compared to what it used to look like. Now the cars still get out to a bit of a lead, but remember, we're in high resolution mode, and I believe this frame rate is running a lot smoother than those early builds were. Now, if they somehow were able to do this without the extra Game Boy Color hardware, that would have been amazing. But again, I don't know that that would have ever happened. But now the game is starting to actually feel really, really good to control compared to those early builds. I don't feel like I'm driving a tank anymore, for the most part anyway. It really feels like a decent little racing game. We still have that feeling of going up and down hills. They are right behind me. Ooh, crashing me into the wall a little bit. Like I said, I'm still very, very bad at this game, despite the fact that I've played it a bit now. But it's a lot more fair than it was. I feel like if I mess up, I can actually catch up and maybe win a race at some point. That'd be pretty neat. Oh, we're being forced to the side of the road again. They don't play fair, that's for sure. Of course, I just was saying that it's a little bit more fair. More fair is not fair, I guess I'd say. So for those of you just tuning in, this is San Francisco Rush for the Game Boy Color, except it's a fake black and white mode that they made, perhaps to try to garner some more support for their port. This game is unreleased, and only one image still exists from an old magazine that is currently on Unseen 64, or at least the snippet from it. Now, you're probably wondering, what did the people who are playtesting this game think about what they were playtesting? And we do have an answer for that. Let's load up. Here's our bug reports. I guess we'll start with the bug reports. The level needs to be more populated so that the player will be aware of where he is on the track. And this was as of 3.5, so this was a few weeks before. If you've been paying attention to the side of the road, things really look a little bit more like buildings than they did in the earlier builds. Why isn't it scrolling down? I am reading you all the wrong thing. That would be why it does not sound right. Here we go, bug reports. We have it right this time. Stress test the record screen with the D-pad. So if you've ever been curious about QA testing, this is the sort of thing that they do. They go to a random screen, in this case the record screen, and they press the A button for 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Eventually it will lock up. Now I could probably go back and see if we have that 3.5 build or something close to it, but I don't think we need to sit here and wait to see if I can freeze the game. Things like this also start to show up, which to me it tells me that they're really starting to move forward a little bit. Whenever a game is released for a platform, there is a checklist that every game goes through, and this checklist is different for every platform that you go on, and it can change throughout the history of the platform itself. So basically, every game needs to meet a certain number of criteria. In this case, there needs to be a licensing screen because it needs to say licensing by Nintendo, or your game will not be approved, so you can't put it out on store shelves, which is going to set you back weeks, possibly, trying to fix that and get it approved again. This is sort of a moving thing, like I was saying. What makes it a little bit tricky is sometimes they'll release a update of these checklists as you're starting to finish the game. So you have to go back and fix certain things, change certain things to meet the new standards. It's one of the things that causes games to not pass their checks. Track 3 is never complete. We showed you this in that earlier version from February. You cannot complete a lap because the track is simply not there. But we will go take another look to see if they managed to fix things up by the time we got to our final build. There are drones on the practice tracks. We didn't even go to the practice tracks. And this goes on. There's 12 pages of it. Things like this. Track 2, drive the track until you reach the first set. Very, very specific things for testers to, or for the producers, the people working on the game, to replicate and hopefully go back to fix these things. It goes on and on. You can receive credit for crossing a checkpoint going in reverse. Interesting. Something I would never do in gameplay, probably, but something that the testers need to test for. No audio options. I think some people may not want to listen to those cool tunes over and over again. We can go down even more. While racing, the drones drive too much in a close, tight bunch. Makes it very hard to pass them. I tend to agree with that. The drones have bad collision with each other. Yes, it seems like we crash into them, but they don't really crash into each other a whole lot. We can go down the list a little bit more. So the engine sound that you just heard will show up if you back out of the race. You can make a high-pitched squealing sound. All right, let's look at some of their suggestions. We've looked at enough bugs. We know that there's bugs. That's game development for you. Let's look at some of their suggestions. What could we do? Ooh, that is my Twitch channel. That is not good. Luckily, there was no key on there, but you got to see everything. That's all right. So give me 1 second. We will pull up our window capture. It's probably going to jump right to our Twitch again. That's okay. There's nothing important there. If you've seen one Twitch dashboard, you've seen the rest of them. Here we go. The level needs to be more populated. I agree. There's no option to exit the game. That's why I keep resetting the game. There is a way to soft reset it, but I've found that it is not the most reliable thing. They agree there should be special features, perhaps pressing down. Maybe we'll go back and see if we can get to some of these. And there's only one page of suggestions on this one, but we do have other documents related to suggestions. The player needs to be able to see further down the track. All of this stuff makes sense and would have made the game a lot better. Let's go back to our game right now. Actually, we'll go back so you can see me for a little while. We'll go to the color version. Again, this is going to be the last version that we have of the game, at least the last version that I've found. Again, for those just tuning in, this is San Francisco Rush Extreme Racing for the Game Boy Color. It was canceled. It was being made by Digital Eclipse for Midway Games. And this is perhaps the first time the game has ever been seen outside of Digital Eclipse or Midway Games. We'll just take our look at our setup menu. Looks a lot nicer in color. We'll go down to 2 laps, so maybe we can try to win a race. Let's go 1 race. See, if we hit up and down, look at that. We can actually switch. I didn't even notice that until we read their suggestions, which tells you, QA people, you're doing a wonderful service for the game. You can make the game a lot better when you give good recommendations like that. Let's go to track 2 again. We'll go to track 3 in just a little bit. That'll be kind of our capstone for the day. Any recommendations for colors? First color I see that we can choose from, I will choose that color. Take a look at you, chat. There's a bit of a delay. I feel like I'm going to choose one and then it's going to show up in my chat. Red is faster. We'll go with red. Here we go. It's very hard at times, but we're doing okay. Next one I'll choose that gold color. I do have some documents to still show, so we gotta sneak those in after this race too. There are so many pages of San Francisco Rush materials. Oh boy, this is the part where I got stuck. You still could get stuck in this build. Oh, I was hoping that maybe we wouldn't get stuck that time. We are not going to win this race. Sorry, if anybody bet on me, you should probably try to get your money back. Let's see if we can catch up though. Oh boy. I don't know where they are. You'd think there'd be a little bit of rubber banding to help me catch up a little bit, but maybe that wasn't implemented quite yet. They are nowhere to be seen. Oh, I kind of drifted around there. I think those are supposed to be trees. There is no way we're catching up. Well, think about it, Justin. Anytime you're in your parents' car playing your Game Boy Color, trying to hold your Game Boy Color to the window so you get that little bit of light on, the last thing you want is to anger your parent or guardian with some music. They probably figured maybe you just turn it down a little bit so your parents or whoever didn't have to listen to the music of the game. I do think that's the sort of thing that would be touched up as they got a little bit closer towards completion. It's a bit hard to know how many resources they could actually put into things like the sound or the music when they were still struggling with getting the game running. So we've got 15 more minutes left for today's stream. I hope you're having a good time. I'm having a fun time showing this game, because I think it's really quite the technical feat for the Game Boy Color. This is one of the issues too. If you drive too hard, you can get stuck in the geometry. But we knew that already, because we got stuck in the void before. So there would have been, I guess, 3 tracks backwards and mirrored, so 9 different courses. That doesn't seem like it's too far off pace for what you might expect in a Game Boy Color game of the era. Yeah, there's no way we're catching them. We'll accept our last place. Now, I've only played the 3rd track, I think, twice. Different emulators don't play the final build all that well. I discovered that MGBA, which is what we're playing on now, which is perhaps, I think, one of the more accurate Game Boy emulators, handles the build a lot better and lets us get into the game and be able to check out that 3rd track. So it was a bit of a surprise when I was getting ready to test things. I initially was using RetroArch, which may have an MGBA plugin at this point. I really like their shaders that you can use where it looks like a Game Boy Color screen. But last minute changes just to try and get all of you something really, really neat. We're going to be out of time. We're not even going to get to finish. 2, 1. Oh, just short. All right, let's check out a few more documents here. I think I can pause our emulation so we don't hear any sound. I think we went over all of our cabinet things. So let's take a look at this. So this was for the futuristic sequel, Rush 2049. This was GameNet, also known as WaveNet in certain revisions, which I think were kind of before this. This was the idea that they would take these Rush 2049 cabinets and connect them to the internet. The spec calls for T1 lines, but from what I'm told, they were actually using ISDN lines to connect the cabinets to the internet. And what that would have allowed them to do is link these things overnight and give not only additional tracks and cars to those that were connected, but also allow Midway to get some additional data like revenue, like scores, and different parameters. They'd also be able to upload the best ghost cars, so you think the fastest people playing these laps, and upload those to the system so you could race against them. And you'd also be able to do tournaments that not only are localized tournaments, but tournaments that go throughout the world. Now, there are a limited number of San Francisco Rush 2049 Tournament Edition cabinets in the wild today. Of course, the servers are long gone, and there are some other hard drives and bits to upgrade your games. But my impression from the research that I've done is that GameNet or Rush Tournament Edition actually was only launched in a few very, very limited locations. My understanding is that Midway, or one of the companies involved, paid for the ISDN line, potentially T1 lines down the line, to be installed in these arcades as to try to gather data to see if people are going to even play it, see what would happen when they had these tournaments, and basically play test it, which is something that has been done for years prior to this game and still continues today with arcades. If you're in any of the major arcade markets like Chicago, like some, I think there are a few in Los Angeles, and of course Japan, there's a lot of these little arcades that all of a sudden a brand new arcade cabinet would show up, and you might see developers hanging back watching to see for the first time outsiders play their cabinet. They'd gather that data, they'd go back and revise their game and make it that much better. Or sometimes, unfortunately, things would get canceled, as was the case here. The San Francisco Rush 2049 Tournament Edition would only see a limited amount of cabinets made. There'd be no worldwide rollout of this game. So, simply put, it just didn't happen. It's almost like an unreleased game, but not quite. Now, going back to the original design specs and talking again about playtesting, the game design was changing as they were working on it. Initially, which I don't think I've seen this published before, there were going to be linear circuits, probably more like the Need for Speeds or Cruisin' USA games of the time. The games would just be linear, which is a huge, huge change when compared to the closed circuits that we have now. There were also going to just be one track with 6 segments. Now there were 3 tracks. And you can see again, extended play zones have replaced gas stations. And unfortunately, no free games will be given out. One of the ideas that they had was if you won or perhaps came in the top 3, you'd get a discount for your next game so that you could continue playing, experience more of the tracks. They decided, you know what, we're not going to do that. So, sorry, there will be no free games. I always thought that was a good idea. If you win a race, you should be able to play another track. But I get they're in the market to make money. They want more quarters going into these machines. It just simply wasn't meant to be. I talked about the damage earlier on here, but one of the last things I wanted to show was a little bit more about the Dreamcast version, talking about who would be working on it. This is what a schedule kind of looks like in game development. Again, this is the 2049 Dreamcast port, and it was a very extremely optimistic schedule. What they found out as they were going on is they were losing programmers. The Dreamcast behaved slightly differently, so they had to change the features of the game. And that's just what game development looks like. And that's why game preservation is so important, is we need to see how these things are made so that hopefully we can make either better choices or more informed choices and just really appreciate what all the developers put into the game. Now, we've got 7 minutes left, so I am going to go back to the game because that's why you're here today. You want to see the canceled port of San Francisco Rush on the Game Boy Color. You can only say it so many times before you start questioning your own sanity. And we'll go to the full game. I won't make you look at me anymore. Not until the end, anyway. We're going to unpause it. You can see we did not beat any records. We're going to go to that final track and see how far we can get. My guess is not very. I noticed the volume seems a little low now. Hopefully that's a little bit better, but MGBA seems to lose volume if I pause things too long. We'll go beginner. We'll go green. Oh, I said I was gonna do gold. I'm sorry. I don't think I can reset it on here. There we go. I got out. That's gold. We'll go with gold. Now again, the music is slightly different than the other one. Here we go. Going for the pass. Oh, I get a little nervous. I'm not quite sure where the track goes, but it looks like it doubles back on itself. Oh boy. Oh yeah, they want us to do a U-turn. This car is not built for that. No? Not a U-turn? Uh-oh. No, I'm supposed to go to the right. Oh no. Hold on. I am bad at this game. Maybe I lied when I said I was good at it. I'm determined. We can win. What I should do is hang back so I can learn the track a little bit. I get worried. They start to drive me into the wall and I'll never catch up again. We do have a YouTube channel. I believe it may be linked below. If not, we do have a YouTube channel. I believe it's Museum of Play. Don't quote me on that one. I can look it up before we close the stream, though. If you type into Google Museum of Play Twitter, or Museum of Play YouTube, it should show up. We don't post a whole lot to it right now, but repeats of this content. And 2 weeks ago, we did a test stream of another unreleased game called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. That will eventually go up on the YouTube channel for everybody to see. We're also building towards things like the World Video Game Hall of Fame. I have no idea what's even going to be nominated. You can look at the World Video Game Hall of Fame site and give a vote. Let us know what you want to see put into the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to mention any games that I would like to see because I do not want to be seen as campaigning or influencing any of you in any sort of way. But I'm really excited to be a part of the World Video Game Hall of Fame for the first time. We also have a Tumblr for our library and archives, which you can find on Google as well. There's also a bunch of Twitter accounts. It's the Strong Museum YouTube. There you go. Thank you, Dynasty, or JJ. Yeah, one of those things where last time we streamed on Thursday from like 3 to 4, but we knew that Friday of all the days, all the work days, was the most likely that we would get a few more viewers because we wanted to be able to share these cool things with you. We also oh, that's the wall. See, that playtester was right. We need to be able to see ahead of ourselves a little bit more. Yeah, so there are Twitch archives where you can go to the videos section above the channel and you should be able to view the old ones. I don't know that I'm going to be able to make a highlight out of today's stream until I get home. But I will make sure that happens. I also record the stream so that we can upload that directly to YouTube. So yes, you will be able to view all the things that we stream. I definitely recommend following either myself on Twitter at Foreman18. There's the Museum of Play account on Twitter. You can also follow any number of us that are on there, whether you're interested in toys. I recommend following Nick. Shannon is the other curator that deals with video games. I'm more of that digital side, working with preservation. She deals a lot more with actual games. JP, of course, a great one. He has more museum insight than I think anyone else that's on Twitter from our museum currently. And you never know what he's going to dig out. He really has his finger on the pulse of what's coming into the museum. And there's some truly amazing things that he shares out too. So this is Game Saves from the Strong. This is our first real episode, and I want to thank everyone who came out. I apologize for not being able to actually win a race. I am bad at video games, it looks like. do follow the Twitch channel because in about 2 weeks we will have another stream. I want to know on Twitter though, what would you like to see from our archives? What sort of content would you like to see streamed? In the future, we're going to be streaming some of the World Video Game Hall of Fame nominations. We're also going to try to stream some arcade stuff. We have our arcade technician Martin, who I've been talking to a lot about potentially streaming things like Dragon's Lair, and talking about the sort of work we're putting in to try to preserve Dragon's Lair so that at the very least it's playable a few years from now, and hopefully longer than that. I'm going to switch out here and just say one more thing. Full camera. Again, thank you everyone for coming out. I know it's a Friday. I know you're probably all eager, ready to go home. If you're on the East Coast, on the West Coast, you're probably just getting through your lunchtime sleepiness. So thank you all for coming out. This was Game Saves from the Strong. I am Andrew Borman. And until next time, thanks for watching.